Hi, I'm Dave Bennet. Back in 1983, I was the chief engineer on a research vessel, and I was a headstrong young man. Driven by ego and self-absorption, I can honestly say that's how I was. One night, we were trying to enter the harbor when the harbor master wouldn't let us in because there were 25 to 30-foot waves crashing against the breakwater. It was too dangerous to attempt to navigate into the harbor. We were about 2 miles off the coast, just waiting there. But some crew members needed to reach the airport by 10. So we decided to put a rubber Zodiac in the water to transport them to the harbor. You know, that boat can handle a lot, and we've used it to retrieve our submarines. But that night, we had been testing a new submarine, so we didn't have a full crew on board. We had a bosun who could handle the Zodiac, but he didn't know the harbor. Then the captain asked me to accompany him to help navigate. We launched the Zodiac and started heading towards the beach. It was nighttime, so the only guide we had was the harbor buoy, and the shore was lit up. But it was stormy, very stormy, with 25 to 30-foot waves. We would go up to the top of one wave, try to spot the harbor buoy, and then drop down and rise up on the next wave. We did that over and over, but after a while, we couldn't find the harbor buoy. We lost sight of it. So we just decided, worst case, if we go in and it's not the harbor, we'll land on the beach. We started heading towards the beach, and the next thing we know, we got launched straight off a wave that had peaked. We launched right off it. We even caught some air, and once we hit the water, I shouted to the bosun to turn us around because we were much safer out at sea. We were in a bad spot just when turning around, I looked up and there was the next one. It came crashing down directly over us. When it did, it folded the Zodiac in half. I was at the bow trying to steer. The rest of the guys were about 5 of us in the boat at that moment. They were behind me, but I got catapulted into the sea. I found myself just holding on because I was pushed really deep and was being flipped and shaken like a rag doll. I had completely lost my sense of where the surface was. I had the presence of mind. I'm a commercial diver, so I feel very comfortable in the water. But I had the presence of mind not to try to swim, but to let the life jacket take me to the surface. I was just holding on, trying to protect myself, and I was being flipped and shaken. Eventually, you can only hold your breath for so long. As a commercial diver, we're trained to understand and recognize the deprivation of oxygen. So when I started to feel those initial symptoms of euphoria, dizziness, and things like that, I began to think, wow, my life insurance is paid. My wife should be well taken care of. Little longer. But eventually the euphoria just takes over and you just breathe. There was a fraction of a second of a little burning, but then, boom, I was expelled from my body. I've spoken to other people who have drowned and they said the same thing. It's very instantaneous. You leave your body. So I found myself in this absolute darkness, this absolute blackness. It felt like nothing, yet at the same time it included everything. It's hard to describe that, but I had just died, this violent death by a raging sea. And suddenly I'm in a peaceful place. Yes, it's absolutely dark, but it's calm, it's peaceful. The ocean at that moment was very cold, and suddenly I'm no longer cold, and it's absolutely silent. So I'm curious. But I saw light. I saw a small light and started moving toward it. As I got closer, that light seemed to be millions and millions, an infinite amount of fragments of light, and they were all moving more or less in unison. You know how a flock of migratory birds would look. You know how suddenly they all changed direction at the same time. Well, these fragments of light were like dancing. They were just moving and were multicolored flowers. It was simply beautiful. The light they emitted as I got closer, I began to feel these waves of love. I felt like I was being held in this warm embrace of love. and I was just amazed. Simply amazed by all of this. I tried to look at myself, because I felt like I was just suspended in all of this, moving toward this light. But I tried to look at myself, and it was a bit funny because I realized that I didn't have a head, I didn't have eyes, but I had vision and could just direct my sight wherever I wanted. I could see that I was transitioning into a fragment of light, into one of those lights. And then, as we got closer, 3 fragments separated and started coming toward me. They were welcoming me home. And I can't express how amazed and how humbled I felt to be welcomed home by these 3 beings. I come from a very dysfunctional family. I was thrown from one family to the next, My mother, my birth mother, really tried, but she did the best she could. But I had a very dysfunctional relationship regarding family. So suddenly feeling that this is my family, I call them my soul family. And eventually, about a dozen of these beings of light began to greet me and welcome me home. It was very emotional for me. But then we communicated, not in the way that we are communicating now, verbally. It was just a knowing. Suddenly I knew that we were going to move deeper into the light, into this area that was more like a sphere. It was absolutely beautiful. And then, inside this giant bubble, we started to relive my life. And when I say we, I mean my soul family and me. We were reliving my life, but not just from my perspective, but from the perspective of everyone I ever interacted with. It was as if my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams of awareness. Wow, talk about mind-blowing. I was simply amazed by everything. But then I started to pay attention to some of the details, and I noticed that some of the things my ego was very proud of, like becoming the chief engineer of a research vessel in my mid-20s. I was very proud of that. But in the life review, it didn't hold that much importance. However, every time I did something with a sincere connection or with loving intention, that created some of the biggest ripple. And so I was kind of a headstrong youth in this life, and my philosophy was, you carve your path through life. I guess you could say I felt embarrassed that they had to witness some of the more unpleasant parts of my life, where I was just being cruel. But they didn't judge me. No, they were just excited to be there, to love me, to support me, and to help me get through this experience of my life. So we went through my life, and then we reached this threshold, this area that had no reference to the life I had lived. I was a little disoriented, but my soul family just loved me. They pushed me forward with love. And we started going down what seemed like a hallway, while everything in the life review was absolutely crystal clear. Once we crossed that threshold, it was like looking down a corridor. Everything in the center of the corridor was clear, but at the periphery, any angle you wanted to take was a little out of focus. I have come to interpret that the blurry part represents our free will, that we can go this way if we want, but because of the core that we have given ourselves in this life, we will be guided back to it. But how do we get there? It's our free will, so we can curve forward and backward. I like to say that we can squeeze the juice out of life and take advantage of all the twists and turns. Eventually, I reached a point where the light itself spoke to me. Then that infinite number of fragments of light in unison spoke and said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way, no way. I know that body is broken. I have no desire to go back to it. It just felt cold to me." Cold. And life is hard. I argued with what I perceived as God and said, I have a family I never knew I had. I feel a love like I've never felt before, and that body is just. I don't want to go back to that broken body. And then the light spoke once more with that loving, fatherly voice that just resonates with you. Expansive awareness. It's like I like to say we are connected to all the souls that ever were, and all the souls that ever will be. So that vast collective consciousness is available to us. So when I heard that word, purpose, from the light, it simply resonated with my being, with my essence. And with that understanding, I came to accept it. It was simple. It was efficient. And then, as soon as I reached acceptance, I found myself outside of my body. My body was still being tossed and shaken in the ocean, but I wasn't surfacing. Eventually, some of the debris from the zodiac, specifically the buoy, wrapped around my arm. Suddenly, a series of waves hit and lifted the zodiac. When it did, it tightened that line around my arm, really dislocating my shoulder and bringing me to the surface. I'm witnessing this, and all the while I'm thinking about how the enormity of me, this being of light, is going to fit into that little dense body. So I was reflecting on this when another series of waves began to crash. When they did, my body got tangled with all the debris. I was thrown against that wreckage, and the waves were just pounding me. It pushed some salt water up, and at that moment, my soul family gave me a gentle nudge, and I simply returned to my body. Well, I'm trying to expel the salt water. I'm thinking, wow, because when we come back, we're half here, half there. I'm trying to remember the purpose. I'm thinking, purpose, purpose, purpose. All the while, I'm struggling to stay on the surface. My survival instincts kicked in, but I was trying to stay upright on the surface. I still felt like I was half here, half there, and had a bit of that expansive awareness available to me. Suddenly, I realized there was a problem with my life jacket. When I undid it, this was an old World War II vest that looked like a big inflated orange pillow. It had rotted, and what was left of it was all soaked in salt water, so it was really weighing me down. Once I got rid of the life jacket, I was able to stay more on the surface, especially after taking off my steel-toed boots. Anyway, I managed to stay afloat, and my companions who were in the boat with me were holding a flashlight and looking for me. Thank God, because I couldn't talk very well after breathing all that salt water. So they found me, and then we swam the last mile to shore. It was a tough night, a really tough night. As soon as we reached the shore, we turned back. I was hypothermic. I was in shock, for sure, but I was conscious. All at once, it seems contradictory. But that was really my state of being at that moment. We did first aid on the beach. Once we got there, they popped my shoulder and thumb back into place. We found our way back to the harbor and headed home. I tried to tell my wife at that time, my first wife, that I had this experience, or that I had died. Those are the words I said. Honey, I think I died. And that scared her. It scared her a lot. So I felt I really couldn't share this with her. My colleagues and I, because we did underwater exploration, put each other's lives in each other's hands every day. Death was a sort of taboo subject. It wasn't something we talked about. So I really felt I couldn't share this with anyone, and I was like, wow, what happened there? But suddenly, after the experience, when I looked into someone's eyes, I could see their light. I could see that fragment of light within them. It felt very intrusive. It was very hard for me. Because again, I was one of those impulsive young people. I was right in your face. Eye to eye, when we had a conversation. And suddenly, I couldn't do that because I looked into their eyes and saw their fragment of light. So it felt very much like I was invading, like I shouldn't. Unless I had permission, see that essence of you. Unless you give me permission, I shouldn't be able to see that. So it was hard to look people in the eyes right after coming back. I also began to see what I called vital force energies. I started to see auras, but I called them vital force energies because I didn't know what. I had never heard the term aura. You know, because I was an engineer. I lived my life to see. And so I just wasn't tuned into a lot of things. So all of this really scared me. I wanted my whole life back. I don't know, seeing the auras of the palm trees in Southern California was like, wow, look at that. And we went back to the shore the next day, and I could feel the land breathing. The storm was easing, but it was still a rough sea. I could look out and just feel. Breathing in the earth was an incredible experience, but I didn't know how to deal with it. I had no one to talk to, so I tried to suppress it. But the three things I could accept were that life review and love. I mean, I wanted to push them away. I wanted to tuck them deep in my mind, somewhere, wrap them in tape, and put a big sign that said, "Do not touch," and just leave them there. But the experience doesn't let you do that. So it really scared me. I tried to suppress it as much as possible. What I did, though, was think, well, I can take the elements that really had meaning, deeper meaning, for me. And the first was what I call acceptance. Because in my 20s, knowing who you really are after seeing that life review gives you a very good understanding of who you are. And I didn't like what I saw. Many things I saw, there were parts I liked, but there were more parts I didn't like. So I thought, I can accept that this is me here and now, and I can work on it. I can be a better person. But then, the other part, I really had no tolerance for other people. I had my plan, I was self-absorbed, and I was going to do my things, but I really had no tolerance for others. But in that life review, I could see how many people cross our paths all the time. We interact with so many people in our lives, and they make decisions we may not agree with, but that's their life, and those are their decisions. And that's okay, because I have my life, I have my decisions. So after this experience, I could be tolerant of other people and their life decisions. And I could also be tolerant of where I find myself in life, the situation I'm in, because I know I can work for change. And so self-acceptance, tolerance toward others and where I am, those were really big. The third thing I took was that I was an engineer, but I had just been thrown into this world of colors. I recognized that there is a truth that is a factual truth, okay? But there is also a truth that is a personal truth that resides within our heart. Every time we discover a personal truth, our heart resonates with it, expands with it, and it serves as a guide on how to live life and flow. So those three things, acceptance, tolerance, and truth, helped me get through about 11 years. I didn't share it with anyone during those 11 years. And then I had a second experience. I had the opportunity to relive not just everything from the first life review, but also the 11 years I lived since that first experience. I saw how much I had actually changed. I didn't think I would change so much, but I did. I truly changed just by adopting acceptance, tolerance, and truth. And bringing that into my life, I had changed dramatically. So that second experience really told me to start living according to everything I had learned. I had to accept that I have a soul family. I had to accept that they were communicating with me. Because another gift of the initial experience was that I was receiving those insights. That information simply came to me, and I didn't know where it was from. But being a good engineer, I tested it to see how reliable it was, how true it was, how verifiable it was, and I found that it was, you know? So during those 11 years, I eventually became comfortable with those intuitive insights I was receiving. But after the second experience, I started to hear from Spirit in a communicative way. I was hearing, seeing, having visions, having, incredible knowings. and I realized that it was my soul family communicating with me. And, some people call them angels, some people call them guides. I really don't get hung up on the terms. But they were communicating with me. Each one had a different flavor, and all had different strengths and things like that. So I had to learn to deal with that, and I had to accept the entirety of those spiritual experiences. After the second experience, that's when life began to flow a little better because I started to live. I tried to create what I called my silent ministry. I wasn't going to go out shouting that I had these experiences, but I could live according to what I learned. And that could be a silent ministry that helped me get through until I had a really big life event, where I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung and bone cancer. That cancer ate away at 2.5 bones in my chest, and my spine collapsed. Then, cancer had metastasized. They found lesions in my hip, in my brain, in my kidneys, of course, in my spine, in my bones, and it was spreading very quickly. They weren't even going to treat me. They were just going to prescribe some very strong pain medications because with a collapsed spine, it was incredibly painful. But again, in that experience, I had almost a preview of life when people came and told me how I had impacted their lives, And that was in 2000. So now we're talking about 83, then 94 was the second experience, and now 2000. I had several spiritual experiences during that time. Once I started down that path, that experience really focused my spiritual intention, and thus allowed me to be who I truly wanted to be. So, I balanced holistic approaches along with traditional ones and received what felt like the gift of doing some healing work on myself, which I now do for others. Now I'm able to really do the work I was called to do. Thank you for watching today's video. If you want to learn how to create a profitable channel on YouTube like this, click the link in the description and let us show you how.